Whiteness is described as a psychosis which must be cured. Please don't tell me that it is I who have skin colour on the brain. So, whiteness causes psychosis, called the psychosis of whiteness, the psychosis of whiteness.
Run to the comfort of our daily routines, busy ourselves with social concerns, accumulate more material things, and turn to the security of conformity. There are insects that protect themselves against attackers by raising a cloud of dust, wrote Kierkegaard. Likewise, man instinctively protects himself against the truth by raising a cloud of numbers. While conformity and the playing out of social roles can help shore up our bridges of self-deception, this may in the end turn out to be more of a curse than a blessing.
So, whiteness causes psychosis, called the psychosis of whiteness, the psychosis of whiteness. I probably do not need to remind viewers about the role of white males in the Battle of Britain and so on. Let me quote a bit more. The aim is to shed light on the concept of whiteness so that it can be addressed, dismantled or overcome, and attempts to be essential to the liberation of people of colour around the globe.
The history of the British people, like the history of other peoples around the world, illustrates the enormous importance of human capital, whether in the form of specific skills, general education, or traditions and laws that facilitate both economic development and the development of free institutions.
In case of developing nations, that's the area where I was active. The process starts when the legitimate bodies of power, the social structure collapse. It cannot function anymore. So instead, we have artificial body injected into society, such as non-elected committees.
Training the armed forces in diversity, with the avowed intention of decolonising the British Army. In other words, whiteness is dangerous and those who have it must be cured. By forcing white people to confront their complicity in the system, the aim is to make them reborn as allies to the dark oppressed peoples of the world. As a mechanism to do this work, only a comprehensive theoretical approach will uncover the root system of its functional properties so that it can be dug up and destroyed. Participating in a critical engagement with whiteness is seen as a cathartic and cleansing experience for those with white skin.
The many centuries that it took for the British to rise from cultural and economic backwardness to the forefront of world civilization in technology and political dominance suggests something of the difficulty of acquiring the necessary human capital. The vital role played in this process by numerous other peoples who came to the British Isles, whether as conquerors, immigrants, or refugees, also suggests how important cultural diffusion is. The Romans, the Normans, the Jews, the Lombards, and the Huguenots all contributed in important ways at different historical junctures to what would ultimately become a British achievement.
This has to do also with migration around the European Union. So the EEC had previously attempted to establish a common asylum process, and a common single European framework failed to transpire. But the Dublin Convention set out a framework whereby member states could determine which state was responsible for processing an asylum application. So this is really now only about an asylum situation. So the Dublin Convention stated that an asylum seeker would be processed in the first EU country in which they arrive. This is unless a relevant family member resided in another country or if they held a valid residence permit or visa of another country. The Dublin III Convention introduced the right to appeal in the country itself, and it also granted more rights to unaccompanied asylum seekers. But of course, the Dublin Convention has been quite important within the EU, but of course now that was previously, and now of course the UK has left the European Union, and we'll come back to that in a bit.
Quite funny. Well, Funny if you find justifying antisocial behaviour on the grounds that it is part of black culture, that is. In the market square in Maida Hill, North London, local residents have been plagued for a long time with the bad behaviour of those who hang out there. There is drug dealing, people swinging bottles of alcohol and pissing up the walls of other folks' houses, and a lot of shouting and noise. As a result, Westminster Council obtained an injunction forbidding the drinking of alcohol and social gatherings in the area. The neighbours were very pleased about this, of course. But wait, a challenge has been mounted at the Central London County Court on the grounds that this is racial discrimination.
You remember I was talking about them here. Social workers who are not elected by people, media who are self-appointed rulers of your opinion, some strange groups which claim that they know how to lead society forward. They don't usually. All they care is how to collect donations and sell their own concocted ideology, mixture of religion and ideology. Here, we have all this artificial's body claiming power. If the power is denied to them, they take it by force.
It seems that, and I quote from what the barrister acting for black people told the court, the majority of those whose behaviour is constrained by the force of the application share a protected characteristic, race. Of course, some of us have long suspected that being noisy is part of traditional black culture, but now a barrister acting for a group of Caribbeans has confirmed that this is indeed the case.
This Asylum and Immigration Act introduced some changes to the asylum process focusing on documentation and trafficking. People who were unable to provide asylum documentation at the asylum interviews were actually arrested. The most significant part of this act was the introduction of what's called the whitelist countries.
It seems that a bunch of West Indians meet to play dominoes in the square, and they are unable to do so without shouting, swearing, and banging their dominoes down loudly enough to cause echoes across the open space. One of those who has hired the barrister to fight for their right to make a nuisance of themselves in public, Ernest Theophilus from the Dominican Republic, says that if you are West Indian, you just can't play dominoes without making a bit of noise. Well, some of us remember dominoes as a peaceful and relaxed kind of game, but it appears that this view of the case is racist. Black people cannot play the game without a lot of shouting and banging about to such an extent that at least one family has apparently had to move from their home. Let me quote again from what the barrister, alleging that Westminster Council were behaving in a racist fashion by trying to suppress antisocial behaviour in this area, told the court. Mr. Theophile is permitted to go to the square to play dominoes, but he would have to do it very quietly and in a way which is completely contrary to how he's used to playing the game. As far as I can make out, here is a black man who is saying that he is unable to control himself to the extent that he can stop shouting, banging about and annoying the neighbours. But that's okay because it is part of his culture to behave in this way, and anybody who objects is being racist. I give a link to a news item about this case in the description to this video. It may prove reassuring for those of you who had long suspected that making a lot of noise in public was a particular trait of black people and suppress the thought at once for fear of being racist, so that they can no longer avoid race and racism. Viewers will observe that whiteness is at the root of the problems which are experienced by black people throughout the world. The idea of being white is dangerous and oppressive of itself, and those who believe in whiteness are lost and delusional until they can be persuaded to abandon their idea of being white so that they can be reborn as allies of black people.
Differential resistance to one another's diseases, which played a key role in the conquest of the Western Hemisphere, retarded the conquest of Africa until much later in history, because it was the indigenous peoples who succumbed to new, mixed disease environments in the Americas, while it was the Europeans who were fatally vulnerable to the diseases of tropical Africa until quinine and other modern medical and public health measures made it possible for them to survive amid the tropical diseases that flourished south of the Sahara.
Therefore, in the eyes of the law, the UK Parliament simply acts as a sovereign body, and the precedence it sets in doing so makes it sovereign according to court rulings.